True Crime Files of Los Angeles, the Inside Story edition. We've been trying to address some of the criminal justice issues that you've expressed to me that you'd like to learn a little bit more about. Since I've been in the criminal justice system for almost half a century, yes, I do know how it operates, and I do know some of the improvements that need to be made there. We started out talking about the mental health issue. Then we've been talking about, I think this last podcast was on sentencing, and that was retribution. Now today we want to talk about deterrence, because I think that's the one that many people think most of when you talk about punishment for committing a crime. And then in other podcasts we'll talk about rehabilitation, which I know a lot of you want to talk about, learn more about. And then you have incapacitation. So let's get started on our topic today, and that has to do with deterrence. And what is that based on? Well, it's based on the fact that people want to avoid pain. They want to do things that are pleasurable. So in other words, if people engage in criminal behavior that brings them pleasure and there carries no risk to them, they'll commit that crime. So you've got to have some form of potential punishment in order to reduce crime. Now, I want to refer back, where does this all start? This idea that people are rational. Well, it goes back to the Enlightened Age, I don't know, 1700s, and we have these philosophers who have this idea that people are reasonable. They act on reason. And that's the basis of deterrent, is that people are reasonable and they realize if there's consequences and if they're going to have pain as a result of committing certain crime, they're going to avoid it. They're not going to do it. So I think, way back in the colonial days, we think of the whipping, the lashing. And yeah, that really did evoke pain on anybody, let's say, who stole or whatever crime they committed. No, they didn't want that lashing because it hurt, and they weren't going to do that again because they didn't want to have to go through that. And we hear about the term the treadmill, people placed on the treadmill. And there was a treadmill in certain communities where if you did bad things, you went on that treadmill for several hours, and that was onerous, painful, and you didn't like that. So yes, that is what is deterrent. You're going to say, well, yeah, but does deterrent work? The answer is yes, it does. And are there any examples that you may know about? Well, the one is traffic. You drive a car all the time and you obey the speed limit. Why? You don't want to get stopped by the police. If you're stopped, you're going to pay a fine. It's going to cost you money. Maybe your insurance is going to go up. So yes, you are deterred. You are going to drive the speed limit in a safe form in order not to get caught. So deterrence does work. And another example of it is like burglars. They break into houses or businesses and steal things. But when they get caught, and then if they face prison time, jail time, they don't like it. They don't want to be in jail. They don't want that. So that burglar is going to conform his conduct. He's not going to commit more burglaries. Well, that works. That works in a lot of cases. Now, what we need to talk about is there's two forms of deterrence. There's what we call the specific deterrence, meaning it applies to an individual. That individual commits a crime and they're punished for it. They don't go out and commit the crime again because they don't want to suffer the same punishment. So let's get into that one because that's the one that we very often think about. A little later on, we'll talk about the general deterrence, where it's the public who looks at crimes that are committed and what happens to those criminals. And you don't want to be in the same boat. What happens to those criminals? The easiest way to understand deterrence is, let's take some examples. And here, I want to use the example domestic violence. That's one that kind of stands out because it's been going on for years. We have maybe a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband and wife, ex, arguing back and forth, confrontation, and maybe there's some striking, there's some hitting, and damage done. So can there be a deterrent? In other words, if a person who does it gets caught, police come out, and he has to serve time in jail, he's not going to do it again. He's going to think, this isn't worth it, and I'll avoid it. Either I'll take anger management classes, or I'll take some type of counseling, so I don't have to go through it. So that's one thing. Now let me give you an example. I want to give you an example of domestic violence, and it's a case that I worked on. It involved Bruce Cockledge and Jana Cockledge. They were a couple down in the Long Beach area in the real estate business. Very successful, did very, very well, and had done it for a number of years. They were in their 40s, and everything was seemingly going okay. And Jana was going to go to work a little late, about 10:30. She had chores that she wanted to do around the house, and she was going to leave and go down to the office. It's not too far away from their house to the office. Most likely it takes about 8 minutes to get there, but she never arrived. She never arrived at the office. And what could have happened to her? Well, her husband calls the police. They put in a missing persons report. And, that goes on for a time. The police are looking for her, but she doesn't appear. Now, the police started asking a lot more questions of the husband. And they found out that on that weekend that he claims they were together, nobody saw her. She kind of just disappeared. She had all these other appointments, but she didn't keep any of those. Why? Well, it was determined after a lot of investigation that the husband was involved in having an affair with other women. He was always hitting on various women in the community, the banker, the escrow agent, and so forth. And the police, started checking it all out. And eventually were able to make a case against him for killing his wife. His wife's body was never found, but he was convicted of killing her. Well, this was a domestic violence situation. And in this case, he had not been accused of it prior. He had not suffered any consequences of it. But we know about domestic violence law. And in those situations where somebody who's been accused of domestic violence goes into court, faces a judge, is found guilty, placed on probation, and gets help, that person very often will change their behavior and will not continue to be violent with the spouse or the girlfriend, boyfriend. So, yes, it works in many cases. However, in this Cockledge case, no, it did not work. So that gives you an idea as far as specific deterrence as to an individual. Now I want to address what the public gets out of it when they look at criminals and who go to court, who are punished some way by the court, whether it be prison, jail, probation, or a fine. And it goes back to our colonial days in the United States. We had the stocks. Back in the colonial times, if you misbehaved, stole, adulterous, didn't follow the rules of the community, you were put in these stocks in public view where everybody saw you. Wow, that was humiliating, and anybody in the public who walked by and saw somebody in the stock would have had to say to themselves, ooh, I don't want that to be me. So yes, it acts as a deterrent. And we have countries that carry it to the extreme. People who steal, their hands are cut off. Yes, does that act as a deterrent? Yes, it does. There isn't much theft in those countries, but yeah, it is a little severe. Now, I want to give you some examples of different things that society has done to persuade people, the public, not to commit certain offenses. And one of the things that you have to have is police officers to enforce the law so that people understand what the law is, and if they violate it, they can get arrested. So this is a case that many of you most likely have heard about. It's called the Onion Field. And two police officers from LAPD working the Hollywood division were looking for robbers because there have been a number of robberies that are occurring, I think, on Hollywood Boulevard. Well, we have Ian Campbell and Carl Edger, who are the two officers out there, and they're driving around looking for robbers. And they come across Gregory Powell and Jimmy Smith. And as they pull in to pull them over to talk to them, they go up to them and next to the car, and they tell them to go over to the curb, the sidewalk, so they can talk to them there or be safe. And as Officer Campbell is going there, Powell takes a gun out of his waistband and sticks it in the back of Officer Campbell. And as Officer Campbell gets closer to his fellow officer on the sidewalk, he says, "He's got a gun in my back. Give him your gun." Well, his partner, Edger, he does. He hands over his gun to Smith, so now the two officers are unarmed. Well, the two of them are kidnapped by those robbers, and they're driven up across the grapevine up towards Bakersfield. And before they got to Bakersfield, they turned off in an area that we call the Onion Field. There's a lot of onion fields up there, and they go into a very deserted area and pull over and stop. And we have Powell and Smith, and they have the guns, and Powell says, "Have you heard of the Little Lindbergh Law?" And I wonder what is going on here. And in Powell's mind is whenever there's a kidnapping, the death penalty can occur. Well, he was wrong, and the death penalty does occur if somebody is killed. But he thought, the mere fact that they had kidnapped him, that they had to kill the officers. So he starts shooting. He shoots Campbell, and Officer Campbell starts falling to the ground, and his partner, Edger, takes off running. It's dark out there, very, very dark out in this onion field, and he's able to get up to a certain point and run through this field and get to a farmer's house and notifies the police. And the police find Powell driving another car away from there a couple of hours later. And Smith, he took that original car that they had. It ran out of gas, and he abandoned the car, and he was caught up in a boarding house in Bakersfield. So both of them are caught, both of them are prosecuted for killing Officer Campbell. The idea was to prosecute them. The publicity would be so that the public would know you don't attack, you don't kidnap, and you don't kill police officers. It acts as a deterrent. And one of the things that came out of the case was that LAPD had changed their policy. Their policy was you never give up your gun. Never, an officer is never to turn over their gun, even in a stressful situation. So yes, that is one of the grounds for deterrence. Another place that society has to deter people from putting pressure on or harming is witnesses. We have to have witnesses to come to court to testify. If they're afraid to come in and testify, then we can't have trials, and our entire criminal justice system falls apart. So I'm going to talk about a case that I did a lot of work on. We have a young lady who was a witness, and she's found dead in the trunk of her car. What happened to her? She was a witness about to testify. It goes back to a domestic violence situation where her boyfriend attacked her, beat her, and raped her, and eventually she went to the police. And she had all these injuries from the attack that occurred to her, and an arrest warrant was issued for his arrest. So that's what happened. And then just before trial was set to go, she was called to the DA's office to come in to go over her testimony, and she was instructed, you've got to testify. And she said, well, I don't really want to testify, but I will testify, and she agrees to. And what happens next is that next morning, the defendant, the ex-boyfriend, called her up and said, hey, I need to talk to you, to work this case out. And she agrees to meet him. I think it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. And as soon as she met him, he took a beer bottle, smashed her head in, killed her right out there on the street. So that's what happened to her, unfortunately, killing her. Now, his excuse, it wasn't his fault, and he wouldn't cooperate anywhere along the line. Eventually, we tried the case, and you can see all the injuries that he had that supports there was a very violent fight that took place when he was beating her with those bottles. Well, he's convicted. He is convicted, and the idea is to send the message to the public. Don't harm witnesses, because we have to have people who are willing to come to court. Now I want to talk about one other one, and that deals with informants. It's very important to have informants for the police, as well as when you prosecute a case. You need somebody who is willing to work with the police in order to get the bad people. Now we have a young teenager who likes meth, and he gets hooked on meth, and he gets it so bad that he becomes a dealer. In his high school, he's the one who deals meth, doing very well at it, and then he gets kind of a little sloppy and he gets caught. The police catch him. They take him into the station, they talk to him and say, hey, look, you're going away. If you don't cooperate with, now if you cooperate with us, we will not press charges against you. Now he's very young and he's thinking about it. Well, okay, I will cooperate. He agrees to work with the police. Now he knew some of the drug dealers because he had worked with them, bought drugs from them. So he's setting up a case in which they will be caught. So he goes to this drug house in Norwalk and is trying to, talk his way in there, and he gets in there. He talks to them, to these drug dealers, and the word had gotten out that he was an informant. And as a result of that, they said, did you talk to the police? And he denied it. And then he talked to some other people and found out that he was in contact with the police. So they take the rifle, they take him down to an alleyway, and they execute him. He's executed for being an informant. Well, you can see the danger that is to law enforcement when that happens. So deterrence is important because we want to deter people's conduct in attacking police, attacking witnesses, attacking informants. Now, there's another part where deterrence really doesn't work real well. And it may be like a road rage situation where you have somebody driving along, somebody cuts you off, then there's an argument between, people get out and they get in a fight. And now, is anybody deterred? Well, everybody knows you're not supposed to do that. And if you do it, there's going to be consequences. So there are spur-of-the-moment situations which don't work out. And I want to take a specific case here. It's a case I worked on regarding the stadium, the Dodger Stadium. It's fun to go there. I love to go to the baseball game there. You get a foot-long Dodger dog and you get some ice-cold beer. Watch a game. It's great. And then when the game is over, you leave, and, in Los Angeles, you have to find your car in the parking lot. And so you have these people going to the parking lot, and people are walking to their cars, and one guy says, "What the hell are you looking at, kid?" Because there's this young, I think he was like 14-year-old, who kind of was listening to him and looking at him. And the guy that was standing next to him says, "Cool it. Don't talk that way to him." And then the original guy says, "Butt out. I'm not talking to you." Well, there's hard feeling back and forth, kind of unnecessarily, but they go to their respective cars and they continue to shout insults to each other. And they're most likely 10 car spaces away. Now, this one goes back to his car, and this Pete Moran, he gets a gun. He gets a gun out of the console, and he comes back, and there is still this confrontation between the two of them. Now, they're still quite some distance away, and for whatever reason, Pete Moran, he fires the gun and strikes this Mark, hits him twice. It's fatal. He goes over to get behind a car, and he dies. Dies right there in the parking lot in Dodger Stadium. So, what happened? How does it happen? Could there have been any deterrence? Well, there wasn't any deterrence there. All the parties knew that if they did anything to each other, bad things are going to happen to them. There's going to be consequences. So Pete Moran, who did the shooting, he should have realized by doing that shooting, he's going to get caught and he's going to go to prison for a long time. Well, okay, we have talked about general deterrence. And what we have learned from it is that it has to be swift, it has to be certain, and it has to be severe. What we know about deterrence is there has to be, it can be effective, but it's not always effective. And a lot of study has gone into it. There's a lot of criticism about deterrence. Does it really work? And the thing is, yes, it does work in some cases, but not in all cases. And like it says here, some people are motivated in different ways. And what deters one won't necessarily deter another. Again, many crimes are committed on the spur of the moment, and there is not much time to think of the consequences, meaning to be deterred about what you know is going to happen to a person who does that. Well, anyway, we have discussed deterrence, and you can see it's not a clear yes or no. It works part of the time, a little bit of the time, but yeah, you can criticize and say that punishment can't be based on deterrence alone. And that's going to get us into our next subject, which is rehabilitation, which we'll talk about in our next podcast. So hopefully you'll join us then when we address the topic of sentencing in our True Crime Files of Los Angeles. Well, join us then.